I received a heartfelt email from a man this week. I'm going to change his name and call him James in this video. James has booked a coaching call with me, but prior to our session, he wanted me to fully understand what he'd been through. He had been dating a woman, who I'll call Tracy, for just over a year. For the first 3 months, everything was going well. He was particularly impressed by her work at the local soup kitchen, compassionately helping the homeless. Then, suddenly, Tracy developed a debilitating series of panic attacks. James was by Tracy's side every step of the way, helping her through this stressful and frightening time of her life. After about 6 months of this, Tracy began to slowly recover. Shortly after Tracy had made a full recovery, James noticed her phone was getting a lot of messages at odd times of the night and day. He caught her phone screen over her shoulder one night and saw her writing sexy messages to another man. When he confronted her, she got furious with him and told him she was done with him and left him for another guy. James is furious that after all the support he gave Tracy, that she'd treat him like this and just discard him after receiving all the support from him for 6 months. He now wants me to help him identify bad women in the future so he doesn't get treated like this again. This story has no doubt struck a nerve for many of you watching. Let's talk about why James's way of thinking, which is extremely common amongst both men and women, will keep him trapped in trauma for life. So I'd like to take James's story and put it on hold just for a moment. I'd like to instead address this core belief most cultures give us from a very young age. And that's this notion of good and bad. That some people are intrinsically good, while others are intrinsically bad. It should come as no surprise that this is in many ways a reflection of the primary religions forming the backbones of our communities. Labeling people as evil is a form of self-protection. It allows us to feel safe. How? Well, if only evil people do evil things, then you can keep yourself safe from bad people by just avoiding evil people. And so long as your family and friends are good people, then they'll never do bad things to you. So you get to feel all safe and warm and fuzzy. But reality doesn't play out like this. Your friends and family, however good they appear, have all done bad things. And all those people you like to think of as evil have all done good things in their lives as well. There is no such thing as a good or bad person. There is only a continuum of people frantically trying to work at how to minimize pain and maximize happiness in their lives. Now let's look back at James and Tracy. I haven't talked to Tracy yet, but let's imagine I can peer into her brain. And let me give you a potential narrative from Tracy's experience. Tracy meets James and quickly falls for him. Things are going well until her life falls apart. She suddenly feels completely helpless and is completely reliant on James for support. She has always identified as a strong, competent woman, and being helpless like this fills her with a sense of self-hatred for being so weak. She is reminded of the weakness of character she disliked in her father growing up, not protecting her from an overbearing mother. Her self-hatred begins to feed into resentment towards James for treating her like a weak patient, which, in truth, she is. Tracy begins to feel better, but every time she looks at James, she is reminded of the self-hatred she has for having been so weak. And every time he tries to check in on her emotionally to make sure she isn't feeling panicked again, it makes her just recoil emotionally. When Tracy meets another man, Andrew, he doesn't treat her like a delicate woman who might break at any moment. In fact, Andrew is a bit careless with her feelings. But that's exactly what Tracy is now craving, because it makes her feel strong and resilient once again. This new narrative doesn't show Tracy as being a bad person so much as a woman who's struggling to appropriately manage her complex emotions. And as a result, James unfairly becomes collateral damage. And this really gets to the core of my message today. Because no matter how many good things a man or woman you meet does in their lives right now, given the right or wrong circumstances, they are all capable of doing bad things. This is because when any humans are in enough emotional pain, Their ability to be compassionate towards others gets diminished. Insert enough immediate pain, and we will commit almost any atrocities to escape that pain. That's just survival kicking in, and nobody should be judged for that. It's human nature, and the sooner we accept that, the better. So really, we don't have good or bad people. We just have people who are good or bad at emotional regulation, communication, and personal problem solving. This means looking for a good person to date is a poor dating strategy, because all you can possibly know is that right now, at this point in time, they are behaving in a way you decide to call good, like Tracy working in the soup kitchen when James meets her. Now, why is knowing this liberating? Surely this is scary. It's liberating for two reasons. Number one, most of us suffer from being too harsh on ourselves. We judge our past actions or our daydreams or sexual fantasies or our current actions as being bad. But your actions are never intrinsically bad. If you've been guilty of hurting people recently or in the past, it's because you're suffering. First, deal with your own pain, and you'll cease being in danger of hurting others again. Secondly, when looking for a woman to date, what matters is how they manage life when everything goes wrong for them. Do they have strong communication skills? Do they have a depth of self-awareness? Can they self-regulate their emotions in a healthy way? Do they have good self-care strategies? Knowing all this gives you a true ability to protect yourself from those who may hurt you when times get tough. While any woman you date is capable of hurting you, women who have a healthy relationship to their emotions are far less likely to indiscriminately hurt you in the future. If Tracy would have had more self-awareness, she could have communicated her self-hatred she was experiencing during her panic attacks. She would have begun venting, possibly taking the opportunity to talk to a therapist about it. When she felt herself projecting her own traumas onto James, she could have begun talking to James about it. Many things would likely have turned out differently. But one thing is for sure. Even if they did break up in the end, the experience would have been a lot less traumatic for James. The best questions to find out about any potential long-term partner is 1. How did their last few relationships end? Why did they end? How did she heal afterwards? And secondly, what traumatic relationships have they had in their lives and how did they cope? I'm not suggesting you should literally just pop these questions out, but you should find ways to get these answers. I sure as hell know that I do. For example, if I ask a woman about her ex and all her blame goes onto him, and she appears like the helpless angel, then that's a clear red flag, and I'll probably avoid dating her, unless she can also clearly show that she's grown emotionally since that point. When I spoke with James, for example, I asked him if he knew anything about Tracy's past traumas in her life. He said that she had been physically abused by her mother, but she had learned the best way to cope was to leave the past in the past. So she never talked about it anymore. She didn't see her mother anymore. And whenever she'd feel a sense of pain about her childhood, she'd bury herself in work, or even more so at the gym, working herself to the bone to block out the feelings. Now, that was James's red flag for Tracy. A complete inability to appropriately manage pain in her life and avoid coping strategies. Tracy isn't a bad person. She's a girl in pain who doesn't know how to feel better. Her painful emotions create casualties around her, like James, and most likely all future boyfriends. For James, coming to this vantage point, which is one of compassion for Tracy, allows James to forgive but not forget. He was still hurt, and it was Tracy's responsibility to manage and communicate her own feelings and emotions after all. James didn't do anything to deserve the pain, but he understands why it happened, and that he wasn't used by an evil and conniving woman, which is what he at first felt. He still feels wronged by Tracy, but he now has let go of most of his resentment. James now feels empowered to better choose a future partner by realizing that he needs to investigate a person's emotional coping strategies, then decide how suitable this person is for a long-term relationship. Having compassion for bad people is a life skill that will give you strength, not weakness. I'd like to apologize to anyone who feels triggered by this conversation. Allowing yourself to feel compassion for people who have done bad things is confronting as hell. especially when it's someone who has caused you great pain. But I urge you to reflect and perhaps communicate your feelings on this with others. If I manage to just convince a small number of men to let go of their resentments and stop seeing women as bad or as good, then I'll have significantly and positively changed those men's lives. As always, I welcome thoughts and comments below this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one.